Hey everybody, it's July 1st. What does that mean? It's free agent frenzy time. But not only that, we have the trade for Noah Dobson. We had the draft. There's all kinds of rumors. There's tons to talk about right here. Time to drop the puck on Montreal Hockey Talk. Hey everybody, Kosta is here again with you for another edition of Montreal Hockey Talk. And of course, before I get started, I've been absent for a couple of months, and that's because I've had a few family things to take care of. But those things are put aside now, and it's time to talk a little bit more about some puck. And when we talk about hockey, oh my God, has there been a lot of stuff to look at of late. And when we talk about stuff, right, as we look at it, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, before I get started on anything, is Lane Hutson winning the Calder Trophy. I never came out and said anything about it. I didn't say anything on social media. But if you thought, and if you're anywhere in North America, and you thought that Lane Hutson wasn't going to win the Calder Trophy, have another spliff and think about it for a minute. Macklin Celebrity did have a good season this year, but nowhere near as dominant or as important as that of Lane Hutson. So congrats on Lane on winning the Calder Trophy. But let's talk about the big deal that happened just a couple of days ago, and that is Noah Dobson being acquired by the Montreal Canadiens. And now, a lot of people are questioning this move, whether it's a good move or whether it's bad. And I can tell you this much. Noah Dobson is a two-way defenseman. He's not overly physical, but he makes a great first pass. He's not afraid to skate up into the play. He's not afraid to go into the corners to go get the puck. He's a very good all-around two-way defenseman. And as you could see from his season last year, he put up 39 points in 71 games. He's no slouch as far as production is concerned, right? And his plus-minus career-wise is -3. So what that tells me is he can put some points on the board, and he's good in his own zone. And isn't that what the Canadiens need? He's a massive upgrade on what David Savard brought to the table. So there's no argument to be had that this move was great. Now, I think they gave up a little bit more than they were expecting in the sense that they had to trade away Emil Heineman and the 16th and 17th overall pick in the first round of this year's draft. But given the fact that the draft was so thin and the fact that Emil Heineman, after he came back from his injury, wasn't necessarily the same player, I think Kent Hughes felt comfortable in giving up that particular future for that which Dobson brings to the table. And if with him and Hutson side by side, the Canadiens have a bona fide number one pairing on defense. Then you look up front. Of course, we have our first line of Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slafkovsky, and boom, everything is copacetic. It's the rest of the lineup that they have to work on. Now, you look at the defensive side of things. You know, when they talk about Dobson not being physical, I mean, how much more physicality do you need? You've got Struble, you've got Caden Gooley, you've got Arbor Jacki, you've got Alexandre Carrier. That's 4 defensemen that are physical in their own zone, right? They're not guys that are going to sweep the puck out based on their talent. They're very physical in their own zone. So in that sense, I mean, having 3 defensemen on the team that aren't as physical, and when I say 3, I mean Matheson, Dobson, and Hutson, and then having the others to complement that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So let's put all that aside. Don't expect Dobson to be in front of the net hacking away at somebody like Shea Weber. But the one thing that he does bring to the table is his ability to get pucks through. He's got an absolutely heavy shot. And he allows for some other moves to possibly come down the pipe, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But overall, you can't be disappointed with this deal. I mean, I'd like to see it in the comments. How disappointed could you possibly be? The Canadiens have just jumped a little bit as far as the development or I should say the rebuild is concerned, right? There's no more questions about, where the defense is. Right now, the defensive core is very, very solid as it is. Could it use a little bit more of a veteran presence? Maybe. But at the end of the day, even if, as everyone has been discussing, Mike Matheson gets dealt, you've got some veteran leadership. Stefan Robida was an NHL defenseman for years. So they've got some real experience to draw on there as well. So it's not like you're without. So I don't see the argument about veteran leadership on a team that's this young. You know, you've got Caden Gooley, who's got 3-4 years under his belt. Arbor Jackey's got a couple of years under his belt. Struble just got through his second year. I mean, there is some experience there, and Carrier's got a few years under his belt as well. So you're not without experience. So don't talk to me about veterans needing to be in the lineup. Are they good? Could they possibly go out and get somebody to like add to be able to have somebody in the lineup that may not very well play as often, but may provide that extra wisdom? Maybe. But to me, I think it'd be a waste of cap space. Overall, I think the Canadiens are in a very good spot. And, you know, as the season progresses, if they need that veteran leadership, maybe they go out and get it. But it's going to be available. So don't look at it as a priority right now. Look at it as something to look at later on. So be it as it may, the Dobson deal is huge for the Canadiens. And there's no argument to be had. Could they have gone out and gotten a second-line center? Possibly. But there weren't very many available. If you look at the market, I mean, Matt Duchene got signed to Dallas, right? He was going to be a UFA. And a lot of the second-line centers in the league aren't available. There are a few. We'll talk about those later. But, you know, are they really going to leave their locations? I doubt that. Moving on. Assessing the Montreal Canadiens draft. As I said before, the draft that the Habs had in front of them wasn't really a strong class, right? After you got past the first 10, it was pretty much cookie cutter from there on, you know, until maybe the end of the third round. You know, sprinkle in a couple of goaltenders here and there. There wasn't really much value to the players that were there, you know? So I don't really think the Canadiens did poorly because there wasn't much to do poor with, right? The Canadiens didn't have a high value pick inside the top 10. They had a couple of mid-range picks, which they traded away in order to get Dobson. And then after that, they had 5 or 6 picks in the second round and beyond. So I think they did pretty well, starting with the drafting of Alexander Zarovsky. And I probably butchered that name, at 34th overall in the second round. I mean, there's a guy who's got that first-round talent, and a lot of people think he slid down. Now, the reasons behind that, nobody knows, but a lot of people are talking about him being the steal of the draft. Is that a possibility? I don't really think so, given where he was ranked. He was ranked about 16, 17 anyway. So, you know, he had 50 points in 45 games in the MHL last year. That doesn't really translate to professional hockey. He will be playing a couple of years for UFA in the KHL, so we'll see what he does there. But by and large, I mean, where the Canadiens got him, it's definitely a plus. Then, early in the third round, the Canadiens got Hayden Papanikis, and now he's a two-way defensive forward. He's got a lot of skill. He's not going to crack the top 6. He's a 3-4 type of center. You know, he's 6'5", so he's a big boy, and from all understanding, he can move. So a guy with that size that can actually skate, throws the body. There's a lot of value there, right? The Canadiens have always been looking for those big centers to be able to, you know, wreak havoc in the defensive zone. So Papanikis could very well possibly find himself on the third, fourth line at a later date, but right now he still needs to develop his game a little bit. He's very similar to Adam Lowry in the way that he plays, as far as, you know, his ability to move, the grit, the tenacity. So if the Canadiens could harness that into the player and at his size, he'd be a really good asset for the Canadiens. Moving on, the Canadiens pick up Bryce Pickford with the 81st pick, that again in the third round. And Pickford's another guy who kind of pushed through in the Western Hockey League. He played for Medicine Hat. He pushed through very late in the season. And so that's how the Canadiens managed to get him right there, because a lot of teams were skeptical, and the Canadiens could very well have gotten a good player or may have missed their shot on this particular player, but he's a third-round pick, right? So you can't really say they missed it. You can't really say they didn't. Overall, the fact that the kid did very well in the second half of the season with Medicine Hat, the risk-reward, it's worth picking him in the third round because he could very well turn out to be a much better player than he was ranked at in the draft. Then we have another third-round pick, and that is Arsen Radkov, a goaltender. And now I expected the Canadiens to draft a couple of goalies in this draft. They didn't disappoint. There isn't very much goaltending depth with the departure of Connor Hughes, so the Canadiens needed to fill the coffers a little bit, and Radkov does that. Now, Radkoff is a little bit of a project because he's extremely good positionally. And he's got the athleticism to be a really good goalie. He's able to make reactionary saves when needed. His biggest problem right now, and he is very young, his biggest problem right now is the fact that he's got very shoddy rebound control. And it's kind of the reason why people say that goalies develop a little bit later than forwards. It takes them a little bit longer because there's so much more to their craft that they have to learn. A player, through the years, he learns how he stick handles, he learns how how fast he skates, how big his body's going to get, etc. And he tailors his game to those particular things. But a goaltender, the butterfly's the butterfly. And your ability to make reactionary saves, one thing that you do all the time with reactionary saves, if you don't take it in a glove, is you tend to leave rebounds. That's where Radkoff's problem is. Whether or not he can control that remains to be seen, but with some good work, he's got that hybrid style that we saw from Carey Price, and don't get me wrong, I'm not comparing him to Carey Price. It's like apples and peanut shells when it comes to talking about the two of them. But what I'm saying is that he's got the size and he's got the acumen to be able to be that type of goaltender. Maybe not at that level, but that same type of ilk where he can play a hybrid style of where he stands up when he needs to and he goes down when he needs to with good rebound control and an ability to direct a rebound into the right place. It's going to take some time. He's a project, but I think he's a good pick for the Canadiens. Then you have J.J. Mooney at 113 out of the U.S. development program. Another goalie, like I mentioned, in Alexis Cournoyer. No relation to Yvon Cournoyer, so there's no legacy there. Carlos Handel and Andrew McNeil. Those guys are all, other than Cournoyer, Handel and McNeil are defensemen. So it's a little bit of depth in the organization. Whether or not that ends up in the AHL or the ECHL or whatever remains to be seen. But at the end of the day, the Canadiens did the best they could with what was available to them. It wasn't necessarily, like I said, a strong draft, but the Canadiens came away with some very good pieces that could be either extremely good or can be serviceable. That remains to be seen through the development. Now, the question has always been, where's the Canadiens' development at? If Pascal Vincent stays with Laval, then in that case, I think the development is very, very good. Pascal did a wonderful job with the Canadiens affiliate Laval Rocket last year. I don't foresee that being any different if he remains with the organization. Now, the other thing that happened today was the fact that the Canadiens did put out a bunch of qualifying offers. It started with Caden Primeau, Jakub Dobesh, then Sean Farrell, William Trudeau, and Jane Struble. Now, Struble expected because of the fact that he's on the Canadiens roster right now and he's only in his second season in the National Hockey League, so it was expected for him to stay because of the tools that he brings to the table. William Trudeau is more of a depth guy for the Rocket because he's going to provide that veteran leadership that, say, for example, Gignac used to provide. Now he's gone. He's gone over to Europe to play, so they need to make sure that they keep a couple of those guys because veteran leadership at the AHL level for the development of your younger players is paramount. Much more important than it is at the NHL level. And then, Sean Farrell, finished off his entry-level deal. He's good offensively. Can he bring more to the table? Yes, but he's a smaller, more diminutive player. Will that translate to the NHL? It hasn't yet. We'll see if it does or it doesn't. But, Farrell was among the leading scorers on the Rocket this year. So no surprise that he got another contract from the Canadiens. And then there's the goaltending. Dobish, of course, is the number 2 goaltender in Montreal. The Canadiens qualified Caden Primeau, and then just very late last night, they traded him, or they traded his rights rather, to the Carolina Hurricanes for a 7th-round pick. Now, it's that tale of 2 different Primos, if you want to put it that way, because Caden came in, being the son of Keith Primeau, you expected a little bit a pedigree there, and there was. But something happened. The game, he lost it between the years. It wasn't necessarily anything that happened to him as far as, his ability to stop the puck. It wasn't that. But I think in between the years, he lost the game, and he lost his confidence. And in doing so, it made him look really, really bad between the pipes and keeping him from being able to play at his best. Last year, we saw him at his best. Through 23 games, he put up good numbers. So we knew he had the ability to be able to be a serviceable NHL goaltender, not necessarily a starter, but a backup. But then last year, in the games that he showed up for the Montreal Canadiens, his game just wasn't there. And so the Canadiens trading him away really doesn't surprise me. And, like I said, they drafted a couple of goaltenders, which I expected. And I think they're going to look at the UFA market to see whether or not they can pick up a serviceable backup. There's a couple of them out there. I will talk about them a little bit later on in this show. But, there's a lot of options for the Canadiens. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as well, is teams are willing to talk to Kent Hughes a hell of a lot more than they did his predecessor. Why? There's a lot of reasoning behind that. I think there's a few people that were out there that said that, Marc Bergevin thought too highly of himself and rubbed us the wrong way on a lot of different GMs. So, it is what it is. And Kent Hughes built a reputation of being an honorable man as an agent, and he's being that as a general manager. And that's reflecting in his ability to be able to make deals to make the Canadiens better. And in talking about that, the next thing that we're going to talk about, of course, is free agency. Now, July 1st, free agent frenzy starts at midnight, and the signings are going to come hot and heavy. There's a few names out there that need to be talked about, and one of those things is Ryan Donato. Ryan Donato could fill that second line center positioning that we're talking about, right? He's a UFA now, and he put up good numbers last year, 62 points in 80 games. He's got 227 points through his career. He's about 0.5 points per game. Kind of everything you'd expect in a second line center. If he can get you 50 to 60 points per season, that's great. And the thing about Donato is, as you can see his numbers on the screen, his goals and assists are 50-50, which means to me that he can shoot the puck and he's willing to distribute. And that's what you want from a second line center. If the Canadiens were to sign him, as an example, and he ended up playing between two guys that like to shoot the puck like Demidov and, say, a Patrick Laine, then, he could be that tertiary scorer on that line and not necessarily feel the pressure of having to score 25 or 30 goals, although he can. And he most probably will. And he'd be ideal for that line, I think, because he provides that little bit of defensive acumen as well as his ability to support the offense. So Donato will be one guy I look at, but I think the other guy that the Canadiens might be targeting free agent-wise would probably be Michael Granlund. Now, Granlund, there's going to be about 20 teams inquiring about Granlund, and he's going to get all kinds of offers. 42 points in his career in 77 games. I mean, it's in the playoffs. I mean, it shows you that he can deliver. And if the Canadiens are looking to get into playoff positioning, then a guy who can deliver in the playoffs, it's important, and that experience is important. And he provided a lot of important moments for the Dallas Stars in the playoffs. Now, if you look at Ryan Donato, he's playing in Chicago, not really too much playoff experience in the last few years, So which one of the two? I'd love to have Granlund, but given Donato's ability to produce, either or would be fine to me. But let's not talk about just the second line center position, because the other thing that the Canadiens are going to look at, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is possibly getting a free agent goaltender. And there's a couple of them out there that interest me. One of them is Anton Forsberg. He's the backup to Linus Ullmark in Ottawa. And Forsberg, every time he played the Montreal Canadiens, I always remember him being a thorn in our side, making big saves, stopping the puck. And his numbers reflect that. They're not too shabby, right? In 190 games played, he's got a 304 save percentage. A 904 save percentage and a 3.04 goals against. Those are very good numbers given the amount of games that he showed up in and the fact that he's not a starter, but he's a backup. So the fact that he can actually maintain his focus, given the limited amount of games he plays, that speaks a lot towards what the value that this goalie can bring to the table. The other guy who's very familiar to Eric Raymond, the goaltending coach of the Montreal Canadiens, is Alexander Georgiev. Now, I did say that, Raymond did have an effect on Georgiev, but Georgiev really tailed off last season. After he left the Rangers, he ended up in Colorado and then over to San Jose. Now, San Jose is a dumpster fire, so they're not really anywhere near being competitive just yet, and they didn't play very well last year, so not surprising. And Colorado, he didn't see too much ice in Colorado. So given that, I think that Georgiev might be a good gamble as a backup. And the reason why I talk about Forsberg and Georgiev as backups isn't necessarily because I'm not happy with what Dobson brings to the table. It's the fact that historically, if you take a look at Sam Montembeault in his career, when he was a backup, he was a backup. No real pressure. He played relatively well. Last year, he was the bona fide number one backup for the number one goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens, uncontested because of the poor play of Primeau. And there was a point in the season where he started to flounder, whether it was because he was being overused because of Primeau's inability to stop pucks or whether it was something else, I don't know. But at the end of the day, when Montembeault was paired off with Jake Allen, he really played well. And that's because Allen and Montembeault would kind of feed each other and push off each other, right, in order to play better. And that holds true with Dobson as well, because once Dobson was brought up to Montreal, and he served as the backup, he gave Montembeault a little bit of a break going into the Four Nations, and then once they get into the Four Nations Cup, Montembeault was almost lights out. And then again, towards the end of the season, the Canadiens were riding Montembeault, and again you saw his game started to flounder. So the Canadiens really do need somebody who can push Montembeault, not necessarily out of the first job, because up until this point, I think he's earned it, despite my not liking his style of play or his ability to stop pucks, and for that matter. But, I think he's earned it based on what he's been able to bring to the table. Now, whether or not somebody steals it from him is another story altogether. But, you bring in a guy like a Forsberg or Georgiev, and then, you know what? Things start to look a little bit different for the Montreal Canadiens, and people stop complaining about, the fact that, Montembeault is not playing well, like myself, for example, or his inability to stop pucks and make key saves at opportune times when the team needs one. That's one of the things that Montembeault wasn't able to do. And I think with a little bit of a push behind him, he's going to focus more on what he needs to do to get better, and his development is going to continue to go upwards as it did when he first came to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the other thing I want to talk about as, we start to bring the show to a close is, engaging on social media. And one of the things on social media that came up is this guy, Mike Matheson, and him getting traded. And there's a lot of talk about it because of the value that Matheson brings to the table. I, for one, wasn't very happy with Matheson's season last year. I thought he focused too much on trying to be Lane Hudson as opposed to being Mike Matheson. And what I mean by that, he was forcing plays that weren't there for him to try to look better offensively because of the fact that he had lost his position as the number one defenseman on the power play. That affected his points, and it also affected his thought process on the ice. A lot of times he would try to be too aggressive, or he would make bad reads and give away the puck, causing scoring opportunities in the Montreal Canadiens zone. So, despite the fact that he still does bring value, given that he is the elder statesman now in the Montreal Canadiens, I think that Matheson brings more value towards trying to get somebody to come in. And now there are a couple of names that I think, and there's no validity to this, right? But there's a few names that I think the Canadiens could target and maybe get out of particular cities. Doesn't mean yes or no. This is just who I think the Canadiens should target. And you tell me whether or not you agree. The first guy, somebody that we'd hate to play against all the time, was Nazem Kadri. When Kadri was with the Leafs, we absolutely hated him, booed him off the ice. But the thing about Kadri is he's almost at 1,000 games. Last season, he got 67 points in 82 games. He played every game last season. He's a very good centerman. He could serve as a second-line centerman on the Canadiens. He's good in the face-off circle. He can kill penalties. He can win face-offs. He can contribute offensively. He's got all the tools. So why not target somebody like Nazem Kadri? He's still got 3 years left on his contract. I think he's signed until 2028, 2029. So why not target him? I think it'd be a great idea for the Canadiens to do that, even if they would have to give up, say, a Matheson or Logan Mailloux or somebody else. I think, you got to give to get, right? And it was proven with the Dobson deal, right? You had to give a lot to get somebody of that ilk. And Kadri is of that makeup. He's a quality forward who can provide points, scores goals. He's a good playmaker. He can get his nose dirty when he needs to. And he's got all the tools. So why not target somebody like that? There's no guarantees that the Flames will, try to trade him. In fact, he's still got a limited no trade clause, which kicks in this year. He had a full no trade for the first part of his contract. Now for the last 3 years, he's got a limited no trade. I think there's 12 teams on that list. So why not take a flyer and see whether or not Calgary might be interested? I mean, they're looking to move Anderson, right? So if that's the case, they're going to need help on D. Why not provide them with a young defenseman who'd be cheap to be able to get within the salary, within the salary range that they want? They're looking to rebuild a little bit. Why not give them a young defenseman? If you can get a veteran like Nazem Kadri for at least the next 2-3 years tops, it gives you time to find that second line center, that future center that you're looking for, or maybe even develop him in your own system. Then there's that one, rumor that came out that everybody's kind of brushing off, and that's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. I was listening to the Sick podcast with Tony Marinaro, and Eric Engels mentioned, Edmonton's trying to win a cup, and I agree with that. So, I don't necessarily think they may move Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, but they just re-signed Ryan Bouchard, and they're looking to re-sign Connor McDavid. So you're going to need that cap space. Are you going to move Nurse, arguably their second best defenseman, or are you going to move the Nuge? Now, you've got Connor McDavid. You've got Leon Draisaitl. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has been relegated to secondary duty. So he's in that whole second-line center discussion. Now, he's got a no-movement clause as well. So whether or not he's willing to go anywhere, that would be another discussion for another day. But it's worth talking about because Nugent-Hopkins kills penalties. He's good offensively. He's on the second wave of the power play. He brings a lot to the table. So, give up a few to get a player like that. But you know what? I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. But I thought it was worth having a talk about. So why not have that discussion? And what do you think? Who do you think the Canadiens should go get? I mean, because there's plenty of players out there. Will they get them? I don't think so. And bear in mind, guys, every single center that I brought up today, if you look up and down the list, they're a left-handed center. Because right now, the Canadiens have nobody who can take faceoffs from the left side. Christian Dvorak not being in the lineup, he was their last left-handed centerman. Even if you were to look at somebody like Kirby Dach to take faceoffs, or you bring up an Owen Beck, you've got Jake Evans, Nick Suzuki, the list goes on and on. The only other guy that can take faceoffs who's left-handed is Alex Newhook. And we don't necessarily want him to be playing at center. So who do you think they should go after? Claude Giroux, obviously, re-signed 1 year with the Ottawa Senators, but again, he was a right-handed center. So keep that in mind. It's very important to have that ability to have centers on both sides. So the second-line center, unless some miracle happens and we get somebody who's hugely able and right-handed, who do you get? Who can you bring up to be able to take that position on the Canadiens and be that second-line left-handed center that you can count on to get, be anywhere between 50 and 55%? I'd like to see what you have to say. That's it for tonight's show. Obviously, for everybody out there, again, I apologize for not being as consistent as I normally am. Again, family issues, but we'll see what happens today at free agency. Will the Canadiens be active? Will others be active? I'll probably be here tomorrow night, and I'll go over some of the more important signings that happened during free agent frenzy. Bye for now.